Helen's voice shook as she read Richard's will. Jake, sitting next to his Aunt Laura, didn't understand everything, but he saw Laura's face turn pale, her eyes widening in shock. She looked genuinely surprised. Grandpa had left her some of his money, which should have been good news, but it seemed to upset everyone. Jake felt uneasy. Why were they shocked by this money? Why was Nathan, his dad, angrier than he'd ever seen him before? The unexpected heir. After the funeral, Richard's old friend Adrian and his wife approached the family. "My condolences," he said. "Richard was a good friend. I'm sorry for your loss, for all of our loss." Nathan, the eldest son, thanked them and asked them to stay for a talk. In his office, Nathan made his offer. "I can only afford to buy half of the factory. How about you buy the other half? This way, we can continue Dad's business." Adrian hesitated. "Nathan, I need to think about it. I think it'd be best to discuss this after we know the details of your father's will. If you own everything outright, then we can reconsider. Nothing personal, just business." Despite Nathan's confidence that there is no will and he'd end up owning everything, they went their separate ways, leaving the deal up in the air. Back at home, the whole family gathered for Richard's wake. Jake sat next to Laura, Christopher's wife. Everyone knew Jake and Laura had a close bond. Maybe it was because she didn't have kids of her own, or just her kind heart, but it seemed innocent. Jake smiled, telling Laura, "Grandpa left me a gift, a saxophone." Laura asked, "Do you know how to play it?" He shook his head no. "You're getting your braces tomorrow, don't forget," Nathan interjected. "I don't want braces. I won't be able to play the saxophone," Jake protested. "Come on, do it, Jake. You're going to have beautiful teeth, which a future businessman will need," Julia, his mother, said gently. "Okay, it looks like I'm getting them no matter what. But only on one condition. Aunt Laura has to take me to the clinic," Jake sighed. Laura agreed to go with Jake. Just then, Helen, Jake's grandmother, broke the news. Richard had left a will. This shocked everyone. Richard had 2 sons and a wife, so it seemed obvious that each would inherit 1/3 of his estate. But there was a 4th person, Laura, who wasn't a direct family member. The family was stunned. They pressed Laura to reveal whatever secret she must be hiding, but she looked the most shocked of all. Laura insisted she had no idea why Richard would leave her 1/3 of his inheritance. Helen, as a wife, got the expected distribution, 1/3 to her, but 1/3 would go to Laura, and the remaining 1/3 split between the 2 sons. Nathan, the eldest, vowed to get to the bottom of the matter and stormed off. The night's greatest shock, however, unfolded when Christopher began questioning Laura at home. He turned to her with a dark look in his eyes. "Laura," he said, his voice tight, "it's time. Tell me the truth. The whole truth. Did you have something going on with Dad?" The accusation hit Laura like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, and she struggled to find her voice. Words seemed to abandon her completely. Christopher, his face a mask of anger and hurt, couldn't bear the silence. He stormed out of the house, leaving Laura speechless and reeling from the weight of his suspicion. He needed an escape, and his feet carried him straight to Charlotte's apartment, his co-worker. She opened the door, and without a word, he pulled her into a desperate kiss. The urgency took her by surprise, but she didn't resist. He carried her to the bedroom, their passion a whirlwind seeking to drown out his pain. Afterwards they lay entangled, the silence heavy. Finally, Christopher gathered the courage to speak. "Charlotte," he began, his voice hoarse, "I'm going to leave Laura. I'm going to marry you." Charlotte's eyes widened. She'd hoped for this, but the timing seemed so sudden. "Chris, what brought this on? Is everything okay?" He sighed, his anger twisting into a knot in his chest. "Everything's a mess. My father died, and he left a will." "I still don't get it," Charlotte said gently. With a bitter laugh, Christopher explained, "He left 1/3 of everything to Laura, to my wife. Can you imagine?" Laura woke with a start, a tangle of sheets beside her. Christopher hadn't come home, and the memory of his accusation cut deep. "No more tears," she told herself firmly. She knew she shouldn't be crying. Suddenly the doorbell rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. She peeked through the security camera. and saw her brother Mark standing on the porch. Relief washed over her. She quickly wiped her eyes and answered the door. "Hey, Princess," Mark greeted warmly as he entered the apartment, his smile offering a soothing balm to her wounded spirit. "Hello, Mark," Laura replied, managing a weak smile. "It's good to see you." Mark's brow furrowed. "You don't look well. What's going on?" Laura sighed, her shoulders slumping with the weight of everything. "It's a mess, Mark. Richard left me a third of his inheritance. The family thinks that we—" Her voice faltered, unable to say the accusation out loud. "That you what, Laura?" Mark urged, genuine concern in his tone. "An affair? That's absurd. Richard was like a father to you." "I know, and that's what I keep telling them," Laura said, her voice rising with frustration. "But there's more." Just then the front door slammed shut and Christopher stormed into the apartment. His face was tight with anger as he headed to their bedroom to change. "I'm going to work," Christopher announced, his eyes refusing to meet Laura's. He spotted Mark and offered a brief nod as he made his way towards the door. "Wait, Christopher, can we talk?" Laura's voice held a desperate plea. "This clinic is my new business, my dream. I just opened it. As you already know it, I need to be there." "We'll talk later," he replied. And just like that, he was gone. Mark's brow furrowed as Christopher stormed past them, the anger radiating from him almost palpable. He looked at Laura, concern etched on his face. "Is this the other thing you were going to mention, Laura?" he asked gently. Laura took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Actually, no," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Mark, I'm pregnant." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Mark's initial surprise gave way to a broad smile. "Laura, that's amazing news. I'm going to be an uncle." His genuine happiness warmed the room for a fleeting moment. But Laura's tears flowed freely now. "I don't know what to do, Mark," she confessed. "The timing, it's just so bad." Mark sat down beside her, his concern deepening. He knew Laura had always wanted children, and the anguish in her voice told him this pregnancy was causing her significant internal conflict. "Tough timing, that's for sure," Mark agreed, offering a comforting squeeze of her hand. "I want to help you, Laura. How can I help?" Laura hesitated, then blurted out, "The family thinks the inheritance. They think there was something more going on between me and Richard. And now this." She trailed off, tears shimmering in her eyes. A new thought crossed her mind, a desperate solution to a seemingly impossible situation. "I don't know how to handle everything, Mark. I've even thought about getting an abortion." Mark's heart ached for his sister. He understood her fear. The sudden pregnancy, coupled with the inheritance accusation, must feel overwhelming. "Look, Laura," he began firmly, "you know I don't believe those rumors for a second. They're just hurting and lashing out. And this baby, this is a blessing even if the timing is awful." Laura felt a flicker of hope battling the doubt in her eyes. "But with everything going on—" "I know it's a lot," Mark said gently. "But you're not alone in this, Laura. I'm here for you, no matter what. And listen, I'm not leaving you until things get sorted out. We'll get to the bottom of this inheritance mystery, I promise." A new determination was evident in his voice. Laura felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Mark's unwavering support was a lifeline in her sea of troubles. "You know, I actually have an idea." A new thought seemed to dawn on him. "I need you to do something for me, Laura," Mark said, taking a deep breath. "Sign a notarized power of attorney, giving me authority to act on your behalf regarding the inheritance. With it, I can start digging, uncovering the truth behind all this." His voice was filled with determination and a flicker of hope. "I'll start with the factory in Fremont. I'll fly down there right away." "Mark, hold on," Laura interrupted, a hesitant frown clouding her face. "A notarized power of attorney, that's a huge step." While she trusted Mark implicitly, giving him such legal control over the inheritance felt daunting. Mark, his voice filled with determination, reached across the table. "I know, Laura, but with that power, I can really dig into this whole thing. Start uncovering the truth behind Richard." His gaze held a flicker of hope. "Think about it, the factory in Fremont, Richard's pride and joy. I could fly down there in no time and talk to people, see what they know." Laura considered this, the factory, a potential lead. Just then her phone rang, shattering the tense moment. It was Jake. "Aunt Laura, are you ready for today?" he chirped through the receiver. Laura flinched, momentarily forgetting everything else. "Ready for what, honey?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "Braces, remember?" Jake's voice held a tinge of impatience. "You promised to take me to the clinic today." A wave of guilt washed over Laura. Completely consumed by the inheritance drama, she'd forgotten her nephew's appointment entirely. "Oh my gosh, Jake, I'm so sorry. I completely spaced. Of course I'll be there in a jiffy. Get ready, I'll pick you up." Hanging up, she looked at Mark, her eyes apologetic. "I need to go, Mark." Mark chuckled, a hint of understanding softening his features. "Don't worry about it, Laura. Go take care of Jake. We'll talk more about the power of attorney later. In the meantime, why don't I find out what flights are available to Fremont? I could go there right tomorrow." Laura nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Mark's unwavering support had always been a source of comfort. "Mark, thank you for everything. See you later." Laura clutched the steering wheel, knuckling white as she pulled up to Christopher's new clinic. Jake, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her, bounced out of the car, excited for his appointment. But the sight that greeted Laura as she walked in froze the blood in her veins. Through the partially open door of Christopher's office, she saw him, her Topher, locked in a passionate kiss with a woman Laura didn't recognize. A sharp pang of betrayal sliced through her, followed by a wave of nausea. Jake, barreling past her, unknowingly broke the spell. Christopher, startled, pulled away from the woman, his expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Jake, this is Charlotte," Christopher said, forcing a smile. "She'll be taking care of your braces today." Charlotte, a young woman with bright eyes and a warm smile, greeted Jake kindly. As they disappeared down the hallway, Laura finally found her voice. "What's going on, Chris?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm despite the tremor running through her. The weight of the inheritance, the pregnancy, and now this. It felt like the universe was conspiring to break her. Christopher sighed, a flicker of guilt crossing his features before being replaced by a cold indifference. "Things have changed, Laura," he said, his voice flat. "You're a rich woman now, thanks to my dad. You'll be able to take care of yourself just fine." "This isn't about money, Chris," Laura's voice cracked, the calm facade crumbling. "This is about betrayal. How long has this been going on?" Christopher averted his gaze. "That doesn't matter. We're done, Laura. Don't make a scene here." The last part came out harsh, laced with a fear of jeopardizing his new life and career. Laura stood there, a statue of shock and hurt. The man she'd loved was throwing her away so easily. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the image of Christopher. Christopher's words were a cold slap to the face. "Remember, I asked you a question, and I didn't get an answer," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Now don't ask me anything. Go outside and wait for Jake. When you're done, just leave." Laura, feeling another surge of nausea wash over her, knew she had to get out of there. The stress was too much. With the pregnancy raging beneath the surface, her whole world was crashing down. Yet she couldn't bear to show her vulnerability in front of him, in front of this now a stranger who she thought knew really well. She turned away and walked out, trying to maintain composure. Her mind was a whirlwind, the confrontation with Christopher, the pregnancy, now this. She needed a minute to compose herself, to breathe. Meanwhile, in her separate exam room, Charlotte prepared for Jake's appointment, her hands trembling slightly. Though she found it difficult to focus, she tried to push her troubles aside, reminding herself that she was a professional with a job to do. Jake bounced into the room, his usual cheerful energy a stark contrast to Charlotte's heavy heart. He settled into the chair and tilted his head back, ready for the examination. As she began adjusting the lights, Jake looked up at her, his childlike curiosity overcoming his apprehension. "Why were you kissing my uncle?" he asked innocently. She had convinced herself that Laura didn't matter anymore, that it didn't hurt anyone. But facing Laura today, and now Jake's innocent question, shattered her self-delusion. Her focus was broken. Lost in thought, she fumbled with the braces, her hands shaking. As she was about to insert a small metal piece, a surge of panic caused her to lose her grip. The metal clattered into Jake's open mouth, and before she could react, he instinctively swallowed. Charlotte felt a surge of horror. What had she done? She stared at Jake, a wave of nausea overcoming her. Her own career, built with such care, felt like it was crumbling with that swallowed piece of metal. Jake, still oblivious to the dropped brace, beamed at Charlotte. "Are my teeth going to be straight now?" Despite her inner turmoil, Charlotte managed a weak smile. Jake, with his braces now in place, met Laura in the waiting room. "You look awesome." Laura tried to sound chipper, hoping to mask her own misery. Jake rolled his eyes. "Come on, Aunt Laura, I'm 12, not 6. I know they don't look great." Yet his smile was genuine, undeterred by brace-induced self-consciousness. The sight of Jake's typical preteen awkwardness made Laura smile for real, lifting her spirits momentarily. They left the clinic together, their laughter echoing in the sterile hallway. Back in Christopher's office, a different type of tension filled the air. "What are we going to do now, Chris?" Charlotte asked, panic evident in her voice. Her hands fidgeted restlessly as she paced the room. Christopher exhaled, a calculated look in his eyes. "Charlotte, my love, calm down. I took care of everything. I confronted Laura, told her we're done. It's over." He leaned in closer, his tone soothing. "In a way, it's even better she saw us. Now I don't have to go through the whole messy conversation." Charlotte hesitated, her brows furrowed. A sliver of doubt flickered in her eyes. Yet, a strong desire for things to be settled as Chris promised made her push that doubt away. With a deep breath, she forced herself to nod and believe him. Laura returned home, her step resolute. She found Mark working on his laptop, a map of Fremont pulled up on the screen. "Mark," she began, her voice firm, "I agree. Let's sign that power of attorney. This has gone too far." "That's my sister. I promise, Laura. I'll get to the bottom of this, whatever it takes." He pulled out the papers, and they both signed, Laura's hand surprisingly steady. Despite this newfound determination, a dark cloud hung over her. "Mark," she said, a worried note in her voice, "take care of yourself, please. And be careful." Mark chuckled, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "Don't you worry about me, my little princess. You've got enough on your plate with that little one growing inside you." He winked, then turned back to his laptop. "All right, my flight for Fremont is confirmed. Time to uncover the truth." Meanwhile, in Nathan's house, chaos was brewing. Jake doubled over in pain, gripped his stomach and let out a whimper. Helen, her heart pounding in her chest, found him writhing on the floor of his bedroom, the new braces glinting in the afternoon light. Panic surged through her as she dialed 911, her voice strained. The ambulance siren pierced the quiet of the neighborhood, and Jake was rushed to the hospital, Julia and Helen at his side. Nathan, oblivious to the drama unfolding at home, sat in a high-stakes meeting with Adrian and Clara. "Nathan, I'll be honest with you. We're well aware of," Adrian said, his voice cutting through the tension, "of Richard's will, your complicated family situation. It concerns us. This deal is looking less and less likely." Nathan tried to smooth things over, promising Laura would be dealt with, the inheritance split fairly. But Adrian shook his head. "There's more, Nathan. Word has reached us that Laura's brother is in Fremont, acting as if he co-owns the factory." He sat back, arms folded. Nathan felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Mark, at the factory." He sputtered assurances, promising to handle his brother-in-law. The meeting ended abruptly, the deal hanging in the balance. After Adrian and Clara left, rage boiled through Nathan's veins. He grabbed his phone, ready to lash out at Mark. Before he could dial, the call from Julia interrupted him. "Nathan, you need to come to the hospital now. He's in terrible pain. Doctors won't tell us much." Nathan arrived at the hospital with a whirlwind of panicked energy. "What's going on? What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with fear. Helen and Julia, faces streaked with tears, could only offer confused explanations. A doctor emerged. "I think we have good news. I believe it's acute appendicitis and Jake's being prepped for surgery." "When?" Nathan's question was laced with urgency. "Immediately," the doctor replied. As they waited anxiously for news about Jake, A new tension entered the room. Laura walked in, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and guilt. Nathan exploded, unable to contain his anger. "You and your worthless brother. I know your game. The two of you, orphans hungry for someone else's wealth. Well, the factory is mine. Mark won't get 1 cent, and you—" He jabbed a finger at Laura. "You'll regret ever crossing me." Laura attempted to speak to explain, but Nathan cut her off, his voice dripping with contempt. Before she could protest further, Helen interjected, "Enough, both of you." Her voice, usually warm and comforting, now held a sharp edge that startled them both into silence. Nothing matters except Jake right now. Richard's will, it will be sorted out. But for now, instead of this petty squabbling, focus your energy on hoping for his recovery. A tense silence fell over the room. Julia, initially focused on her son's condition, locked eyes with Laura. "Look, Laura," Julia began, her voice shaking with emotion, "I don't fully understand what's happening here, but right now, I can't handle it." She took a shaky breath. "Please, just leave. Let us focus on Jake." With a heavy heart, Laura left the hospital without looking back. Jake's surgery was a success, a flicker of hope within the storm-tossed Evans family. Yet Nathan was consumed by rage and determination. He wouldn't let Mark or Laura win. A new, sinister plan hatched in his mind. With 2 shady-looking men at his side, Nathan arrived in Fremont. Finding Mark at his hotel, he gave a curt command. "Get in the car, Mark." They drove in silence, leaving the town behind, turning onto a dirt road that disappeared into a dense, unwelcoming forest. When they reached a desolate clearing, Nathan ordered Mark out of the car. He pulled a gun from its holster, the metal cold and heavy in his grip. "Mark, consider this an act of mercy," he snarled. "Hand over the power of attorney." Fear pulsed through Mark, but survival instincts kicked in. With trembling hands, he reluctantly gave Nathan the papers. Nathan tossed a thick wad of cash at Mark's feet. "This should keep you and your thieving sister afloat, but I expect Laura to file for divorce immediately. Then both of you vanish. Disappear." He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Now, Mark, you will repeat after me," he commanded, his voice a chilling snarl. "Laura will divorce Christopher. Her claim on the inheritance is over. We will leave the Evans family in peace." Mark repeated the words, his voice hollow and defeated. "Good," Nathan smirked, pocketing his phone. "Remember, I showed you mercy today. Break your word, and you won't receive the same treatment next time. By the way, I will not see you around the factory, right?" They got back into the car and sped away, leaving him alone in a place that felt ominously like a graveyard. While going back to the town, Nathan sent the video to Laura. Laura's panicked call came minutes later. "Mark, please tell me you're okay." Mark tried to sound reassuring. "Laura, I'm fine, don't worry." "Mark, cut the act." Laura's voice was thick with distress. "He hurt you, didn't he? Tell me the truth." Defeated, Mark explained the brutal turn of events, concluding with, "I'm so sorry, Laura. I failed. I couldn't uncover anything at the factory. And Nathan, he's dangerous." Laura hung up the phone with a heavy sigh. She had to act. Her fingers fumbled as she dialed Christopher. "Chris, I'm leaving. You'll find divorce papers ready for your signature. I don't want anything, not a single cent. As for the inheritance, let it go. It's yours now." A flicker of sadness passed through her, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. "Goodbye, Chris." Despite the pain the call had clearly caused him, Christopher couldn't deny a sense of relief. He was free to build a life with Charlotte. Nothing stood in their way now. 6 months passed, a blur of endless hospital visits and fading hope. Jake's condition worsened, and the Evans family was drowning in despair. Nathan, a shadow of his former self, found himself seeking solace in unexpected places. Night after night he whispered prayers. "God, forgive me. I don't ask for anything, just let Jake be well, please." A glimmer of hope arrived in the form of a doctor, willing to take a risky gamble. A new examination was scheduled, a last-ditch effort to uncover the mystery behind Jake's illness. But before the procedure, Jake voiced a dying wish. "I want to see Aunt Laura one last time." Nathan swallowed his pride and dialed Laura. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Laura, I'm begging for your forgiveness. The inheritance, it can be yours. Just please, come see Jake." A wave of complex emotions swept over Laura. "I'm not coming for the money," she said sharply. "But for Jake, yes. Tell me he'll be well. Promise me." When Laura arrived, her pregnancy was impossible to miss. The sight sent a jolt through the Evans family, and a chilling thought crossed Nathan's mind. Could this child be Richard's? But nothing mattered more than Jake. They showered Laura with gratitude, their desperation palpable. The surgery seemed interminable. When the doctor finally emerged, a wide smile stretched across his face. "It's almost like a miracle," he exclaimed, "but simple. We found remnants of a medical tool, probably left behind after a dental procedure. It was causing his health issues. Everything should be back to normal soon." A week later, Jake was miraculously on the mend. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Mark, fueled by determination, made one final visit to the Fremont factory. In a desperate act, he confessed everything to the manager, pleading for answers. The manager was moved by his earnestness and agreed to help, though he had no answers to offer. Mark asked to see Richard's office. As he examined the familiar space, searching for anything, a framed picture caught his eye. It hung unnoticed behind Richard's old chair. "What's the significance of this picture?" he asked the manager. The manager explained its history, how the picture depicted a group of employees who had died in a tragic experiment, and how much Richard had treasured their memory. Mark felt a jolt of recognition as he requested a closer look. Then it hit him. His parents were among those in the photo. He asked the manager, a tremor in his voice, "Did you know them?" "My parents, the Wilsons." "Of course," the manager replied. "They were brilliant scientists, close friends of Richard. They died in that accident." The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Mark flew back, clutching the framed photograph like a lifeline. He arrived at the Evans family home, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and hope. In the living room, where tension usually hung heavy, he found them gathered, faces etched with anxiety. "Nathan," Mark began, his voice surprisingly steady, "do you remember these people?" He held the photo aloft. "My parents, the Wilsons, they worked for Richard. They died there in Fremont, at the factory." A collective gasp filled the room. Helen took the picture with shaking hands, tears welling in her eyes. "I remember them now. Scientists, brilliant minds. And Richard, he always seemed so fond of them." Her eyes widened. "The marriage, Chris and Laura, Richard's will. It all makes sense now." Mark looked at Nathan, who stood frozen, the color draining from his face. Mark returned the wad of cash untouched. "Here, take this back. My intention was never the money. It was to clear my sister's name." He looked at the rest of the Evans family, his voice filled with quiet sincerity. "You have your answers now. Please leave Laura alone. Give her the peace she deserves." And with that, Mark turned and left. A weight lifted from his shoulders. Weeks later, Laura, at peace with the past, focused on the joyful present. Mark stayed by her side, a steadfast source of support. The arrival of her baby boy filled Laura with immeasurable happiness. This was the family she had longed for. Her heart swelled with gratitude that she had listened to Mark and chosen life. Word of the birth reached Jake, who earnestly asked his parents to visit Laura. This time there was no hesitation. Upon seeing the tiny bundle of joy, genuine smiles lit their faces as they offered Laura heartfelt congratulations. Unbeknownst to them, Nathan slipped away to make a call. "Chris, you're a fool," he barked. "Did you know you have a son?" A wave of emotions, shock, guilt, and a flicker of hope washed over Chris. He raced to Laura's side, the memory of Nathan's harsh words fueling his determination. Laura was surprised to see him, her initial wariness replaced by a flicker of curiosity. Christopher didn't waste time. He poured out his heart, confessing his infidelity and expressing his deepest regret for the pain he'd caused. "Laura," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't change the past, but I can beg for your forgiveness, and for our son's chance at a life filled with love. I know it's a lot to ask, but—" He hesitated, then blurted out, "There's more. After I learned what Charlotte did, what her actions almost did to Jake. It's over between us. Completely. Laura absorbed his words, her gaze fixed on the peaceful face of her sleeping son. The hurt and anger that had festered for so long began to recede, replaced by a sense of cautious hope. Could there be a future for their family? A chance to rebuild on the foundation of honesty and shared love for their child? Emotions were running high at the Evans family home. After a difficult and soul-searching discussion, the Evans family reached a stunning decision. Laura and Mark did, in fact, deserve the inheritance. It was time to honor Richard's will. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated with our latest videos. Thanks for your support. Have a beautiful day.